Hello, today is April 4th, 2019. This is a breakout session with respect to the kubeadm subproject, but it also dovetails into release artifacts and publishing. We've loved or wanted to escape from this for a long time, but we find ourselves in a situation where we have to manage and maintain some of the packages. So we've had a long-standing set of KEPs that we've got merged last cycle. One was for the release process, one was for the packaging. Merrick, do you want to give us an overview of what you currently have today and where it's at, and kind of walk us through what you've done so far?
Yeah, so I have a really crude container that has FPM inside of it that's runnable. And I have a small Go script that takes in and parses a YAML config file, mostly based off of NFPM's YAML file. So it mimics it a lot, except it has a few extra things and changes a few things. And we can discuss what we want and whatnot. So it takes that YAML file in, and then it parses the arguments out and submits them to FPM and builds a package that you can then Docker CP off the container. I mean, that's what it does.
Do you want to walk us through your branch and talk about the details?
Yeah, so actually there was a couple things that I don't know if I did them how they were supposed to. So I actually made it like kubeadm. So I mean, it builds when you do, I use build run.sh make as the command to build. That's what's always worked for me. So it builds like kubeadm does currently. I don't know if that's what we want. That's what I made. So
can you screen share and show your branch, please?
I can. Maybe. All right. So here's my branch. I did link this in the meeting invite, and I can post it on Slack if we want. But so there's a super simple Docker file. Like I said, it needs a lot of work to actually be a real Docker file. But it installs everything FPM needs. This just runs the app. And this is the entirety of it. It's pretty much this one file. The types holds the configuration for the YAML files. And so all it's doing right now is it parses the file, and it just parses. We could update this to like take a file location, but it takes the config.yaml that's in the directory, checks for an error. Here is FPM actually builds it based off of your file system. So you basically build your file system out and then tell it to build that package. Or we can actually do virtual file systems, so we can like map things to each other. So this is just some comments on how we could do that. Currently, I don't do that. So you need to like go into you need to copy the file in and set it up in user bin and run it for there if you want to. So this is something that needs to happen automatically. I build a list of commands based off of the config file.
So if you expand back up a little bit when you talk about building out the file system, that sounds very Debian-like. So it actually builds out the directory structure for where it expects the install artifacts to be.
Yes.
Instead of having like a specification of where the artifacts should be built into. I mean, RPM does a very similar thing with its chrooting RPM builds. It basically takes your artifacts for wherever they currently live and smashes them into a directory structure, and then it binds it all together.
So, and I think that that's what this does right here. You're building that, but yes, this takes a directory structure and makes a RPM or deb out of it.
So how do you how do you get all the rights and privileges and ownerships and everything else that are required for the given directories?
You run as root.
Yeah, but I mean, like you need to when you install some packages, they install as a user, right? And you have to specify. You can specify ownership rights of given areas and privileges. Okay. Have you investigated any of the higher level abstractions that you would need for what if I want to install dependencies that are missing? What if I need to set privileges on directories? Do you have a dep resolver?
Yes. So you can do the requires, and it will resolve those. So that's what this is doing right here. This is just showing what it depends on. And FPM handles, so when you build a RPM or a deb, this is a generic way of saying that this depends on a package, and then it does it the deb or RPM way for that, if that's what you're asking.
One of the fundamental problems, though, too, is that the naming conventions are not always the same across RPM systems.
Yeah.
And
I do have a way I'm sorry, I was a little confused. I do. So in your types here, you actually get to override. So basically, let me pull up let me pull this up really quickly. So if this is the YAML file, what you can do is do overrides. So this was my way of fixing that. So basically, these are the generic. This is what we're going to say works for both things. And the overrides are things that are specific to RPM, or, the depends, maybe this needs to depend on, it's named something different.
Okay, you're kind of invert boiling the world, backwards. So you're reinventing specification language in your own semantics, and then the abstraction is inherently leaky. So now you have both RPM specifications and deb ones down below.
So, I mean, you don't have to have any of these. This is just if you need it.
Yeah, but we're going to need it. That's the thing.
Okay. So do we want to just have 2 config files?
Well, that's what we do today, which is not terrible, but we want to have one way of basically doing a patch to patch the current structure and then output the artifacts.
Okay.
So if we just took the release repository, smashed it over into the directory structure, but we did an abstraction layer for these are the parameters that you override, and it's you have a in file, and then your in file basically does the overrides. It lays them on top of the current structure. I'm just trying to see what's less cost, what's easier to maintain.
No, and absolutely. Again, this was me just trying to make a proof of concept quickly over the weekend. So that makes sense.
What do other folks think?
I also didn't put it in the proof of concept, but I had this concept of, when we parse it out, we can actually supplement variables. So
I think the biggest thing that we need to do from a requirements perspective is to do a variable substitution override. And having a configuration file that basically is the single input file that then does it for both, even if they're just stubbed out templates for the most part, that would be sufficient. I think
you're saying instead of doing this override, you're saying to do something like this. Yes?
Possibly, a 2-step process, either with FPM or using the existing packages. right? So if you had the existing package with an override substitution, that's what we currently need. I don't.
Okay.
The one thing I'm trying to figure out is the cost benefit analysis of doing FPM this way, or whether or not we're better off just using the packages and making canonical specs and canonical deb based installs.
I'm thinking if it's worthwhile, instead of having like the spec that has variable substitution, just to have one spec per version, which will.
Well, yeah, we're going to do that. It's going to be branched in KK. So the current problem, one of the many current problems we have is that we have one spec to rule them all, and that's Incepted Madness. I've never done that, and I've done RPN packaging since how old am I? I don't even know. I'm very old. And it's always been branched ever since I started working on RPM specs. So if you go back to the Fedora days and the Red Hat days of early Yore, dist-git ruled the kingdom, and dist-git was basically a branch per spec, right? I've never seen what we're doing before. So that is fine. We can do that. I think the question I'm having is the maintenance burden of doing FPM in this manner versus just having like a spec.in or just doing some variable substitution that we could define the variables and just substitute them into either the spec or the directory structure for Debian on the build. So that way a person can customize easily with either a Go file or a script.sh or whatever you want to do with it. Do folks know what I'm saying, or should I draw a picture here?
No. I mean, you could draw a picture if you wanted, but I think I understand. We could just, call RPM build ourselves instead of with a spec file that we parse.
Yeah. So I want to keep some of it here. Let me take a picture of my dry erase board because I have to go back to it. Bang. All right, that thing's done. Let me do my custom ghetto style eraser. You want to stop sharing? I can share my screen here.
Oh yeah.
Let me switch cameras. How's my audio sound, by the way? Is this good, or do you hear crackly pops or wheezing?
No, that's pretty good.
The weird old sound seems like it's gone.
So I have two cameras, and if I switch to this camera, do folks hear the wheezing now?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, that's because I think it's interference, but I'll switch back to their camera. So it should be gone now, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so problem is two cameras with the same name. Let me switch the video. All right. So, all right. So there's a couple different ways we could parse this thing. One way is that you have this is the way of NF, or the FPM way, a YAML file. And then it has a bunch of overrides. So you're going to basically have overrides into the YAML file, which then generates, and then it does .deb or .rpm. And the purpose, we're going to put this stuff into the /build directory in KK. This already actually exists, but it's not used for publishing. But what exists currently is a little bit more messed up. It's not very clean. It's got some basilisms in there. And what I'd like to do is take the basilisms out and sort of abstract the basilisms into a single thing that can be the overrides, right? Because I don't want to rely too heavily on Basil. I would just like the directory structure and be able to say, like, make a package. And I don't want to have Basil do all its machinations to do everything, but I could have Basil call this thing if it needs to. So the other, somebody say something? Nope. The other way to do this would be just to have like you could have some .sh or .go plus YAML, which is just the overrides. Then goes into a gen, actually goes, this actually would execute, and then it would output the actual .spec, and then the .debdir, which then calls the gen, which then does the .deb or RPM. These would be canonical specs, right? Like very typical. We'd rewrite the spec. We'd nuke the spec that currently exists. I don't know if people know this, but I rewrote the entire Kubernetes spec file a long time ago, and I submitted a PR, and it sat there bit rotting forever because no one maintained it or owned the space. So this was 2 years ago. What do folks think about A versus B? Canonical packaging with overrides, or putting things into a customized version?
So right now, we'll be more in favor of option A, and possibly just because we can, originally when FPM was selected, it was not the first candidate. It was actually NFPM, which is written in Go, and it's pure Go. And the features missing were just a few. And ideally, if we had to adopt at some point NFPM, will be a drop-in replacement for what we're currently will call the generator in option A. I think it could fit better long term as a way to create artifacts.
Just expanding on some of the stuff that I did. NFPM is actually really cool and really simple. I actually don't know that supporting what we want out of it would be that hard. So basically, it does what Timothy is stating. It builds the spec file and then uses RPM build to do it. And it does the same thing for Deb. It goes through and builds what Deb wants. And then I don't know as much into the Deb building process, but it does it the official way.
So it sounds like this is B is almost like NFPM.
Yeah, when you were saying what you were doing there, I was like, oh, that's like NFPM, except that it doesn't do changelogs yet. And I don't know, I could probably make a merge request and get it merged to do changelogs. Now, their YAML file is just like the one that I did, a little bit different, but close to the same. So if you don't like that YAML file.
Well, what I didn't like about the YAML file is all the overrides for the distributions. Like, why wouldn't I just put that into the spec file, and then just have the spec file have an override YAML that then just substitutes the spec?
So it takes the one YAML file and builds the spec file out and the deb file from that YAML.
That's currently what Bazel does too. It's kind of a mess, right?
Okay.
I would like to not auto-generate a spec in its entirety, because a lot of times the auto-generation is always deficient.
Okay.
Because if we're going to create a canonical spec, we want to own and maintain it, as well as a canonical deb file, because distributions, the problem with generic generators is that they never take into account the distributions as they change over time. There's always some lagging inefficiency there.
Okay. I don't really have any skin in the game. So I mean, either one's fine to me.
No comments, other than I know that Lumamir hates it.
Yes, Linux packaging in general. Sorry.
I guess I can add that I have seen projects doing what Kubernetes does. I also have not been a fan of it because I find it extremely fragile from the maintenance perspective. Unless you have a very strong owner who's constantly curating well, it falls apart. You end up exactly where ours are. I also agree that having things overly generated becomes a difficulty point for maintenance. A flat spec file, especially if you look at what our spec files do, are intending to do today, it's almost nothing. It's very simple. There's a straight flat logical flow if you look at what would be the generated spec file. And almost anybody who's seen a spec file could walk in and look at that and say, oh, I get it. I know what's going on. So that means you have a chance of having maintainership, a better chance, broader set of potential contributors. The more it gets abstracted away, somebody who comes in and wants to contribute has a whole new custom generator thing that they have to comprehend. And then that becomes extremely difficult. The articulating in an abstracted way your dependencies across distributions and operating systems, you end up with very complex files. Right now we only have a couple of things that we express, and ours are already a mess. And over time, if the project drifts towards something more like a distribution, these packages are going to have a distribution level feel to them, and they'll be potentially quite complicated in what they try to articulate. So having something closer to a straight description in the native packaging form for the Debian or RPM-based distributions, I feel like that's much more likely to be maintainable over the long run. Well, a question maybe that came up as you started writing, Tim, just the first set. What are the things specifically that we imagine would be overridden? Is it the going from the abstracted IP tables to the distro-specific IP tables, name plus version, or what types of things would be overridden there? Am I missing something maybe beyond just dependencies?
You mean an A?
Yeah.
A bunch of things that are outside of dependencies. So Fabio can probably outline some of those.
No, I was curious. The same thing, and I'm thinking about the overrides would be something very distribution specific, even version specific within the distribution.
Yeah. So an example would be like if we chose to defaultly install kernel modules for IPVS for a given version, right? That would be an example of where it'd be both distro specific for Debian versus RPM, and also, version specific for Kubernetes version. Because right now we still IP tables is still the default across the board.
I mean, there's even very simple things like IP route, the package. It's sometimes it's named IP route, sometimes it's named IP route 2, and this causes problems. We've seen that before with lesser known distributions.
One thing I know for SUSE is that we like to package our own stuff with our own changelogs if we make some contributions to it. So we'd override the changelog with the stuff that we added to it, as well as our dependencies aren't always the same as other people that use RPM.
Yeah, there's also, I still debate upon this too, and people can tell me it's a good idea or bad idea, but like the default install that we kind of provide for Kubernetes versus what some other ones provide is not very friendly from the ability to diagnose issues that arise, and maybe having like a specified list of helper utilities that you would want installed, so that way when bears do attack, you have the ability to diagnose and we can put them on a happy path for being able to debug their environments.
Question, and this is probably given that I'm not super familiar with that part of Kubernetes, but Is there a list of distributions that are supported with the artifacts that are created today?
It's pretty much CentOS, RHEL, and Ubuntu. That's quote unquote. We create packages for them, and the SIG cluster lifecycle group pretty much will respond to those distributions, and we'll try to help them. But the release team hasn't ever had like a formal support role for packaging, which I would like to change.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I had a long time ago. Had a similar experience with Docker when creating packages, RPMs, and so on for Photon. And in order to create official Photon packages for Photon, I had to go through various hoops to make sure that it was supported, because we had some interesting challenges like different package names and so on, even though we were using RPMs. And I had to go through several hoops, and the build process at the time was not very straightforward and streamlined. It was kind of a mess, probably even worse than what Kubernetes is today. But I thought that separating build rules per distribution was a good idea at the time. So you could have support, you could add support for new distributions, and you could just simply add a new spec or a new override, call it whatever you like, to support any new distribution that may come out in the future with different requirements, like changing package names and so on. So I don't know if this makes sense. It would be something we should do at the same time as in standardizing a set of distribution we want to support in Kubernetes, and working with that in mind to create specs for the various distributions and their own quirks.
That your topic or your statement and Ross's comment inside of the chat. Ross, do you want to talk about that? They kind of overlap. They overlap in counter ways.
Can I give an example? So some time ago, I participated in a project that it had a fairly big contributor base, but at some point we got so frustrated with the packaging that we stopped doing it ourselves. And what happened is that the distros started approaching us with people and resources to maintain the packages for us. So at the point when we stopped, the community triggered basically volunteers to do the work.
So that will work for Debian, and we even have people at Debian who we have talked to that we just need to get them to potentially fill in to do the dev portion. With RPM, this is a problem with Red Hat's current model. Red Hat will never support the spec files for upstream ever because of RPM packaging rules, also because of Red Hat specific product rules. So because they have a downstream distribution, which is OpenShift, they will never support the upstream distribution. So that means that they will intentionally not contribute folks to doing that.
Also, in the particular project I'm talking about, the distros at some point became hostile and started attacking the developers on mailing lists because we were not following like the process, the correct process of creating specs and stuff. And we entered some flame wars. At that point, I realized that the whole packaging is broken on a very fundamental level on Linux. But yeah, if we have to maintain it, we have to. The question is how to do it in the most maintainable way.
I'm kind of, can we maintain it in such a way that we maintain it for the distributions? So we make it really easy for distributions, but don't actually maintain official ones. I think, honestly, I like Timothy's in-game where we have a image installer container that handles all this grossness for people, but that's...
It's the ideal world I'd like to get to, but I've come into, I realize that my vision of the world is usually about 5 years out from where reality is today. So if we were to do that, the consumption model for most people will be broken.
Like specifically, I'm guessing, I mean, I haven't seen this in a couple of years now, but would Koji support running a build container? Guessing that's not in their model.
It is.
Is it?
I don't know if it's in Koji's model.
Okay.
So Koji did add containerized build support
Huh.
a while ago when they were doing things for Atomic. So the weird thing is that it's usually not. It's a separate step to publish containers.
Mark, what are y'all still using OBS, and would something like this integrate with how the SUSE world does stuff?
A strong and solid maybe. Yes, we do heavily use OBS still. We love our Kiwi files. And by we, I mean, I've never actually written a Kiwi file. I'm not a build engineer for SUSE. But the team that I work on is trying to embrace upstream. And so I think that there's a strong possibility that my team would, yes.
I think if we stub out and make if we start to stub out this in the main repository and have the canonical versions of the packaging there and do public broadcasts to different distributions, like I know Debian maintainers, right? And I am a packager for Fedora still, whether or not I admit that. I can write canonical specs, right? I don't particularly like doing that, but I can do it. So we can get a canonical spec in place that matches what I PR'd 2 years ago, along with the getting a Debian structure that's more like canonical packages, and then have the overrides available for distributions, and see if that's good enough on the branching strategy. So like every version of Kubernetes has its own branch. We'd have to merge some of this stuff backwards to previous branches. That's going to be like the hard part, right? If we wanted to turn a knob for how we release things, which is like a separate problem, but relates to this work. I don't know how we cut this in an incremental fashion. If we should cut this in an incremental fashion, or should we just whole hog, backport these changes that we would make onto 114 and 113?
So I did just want to go back to something that Tim Pepper said. I do think that we should keep it simple for maintainers. I'm very new to the project and new to Go, and so while I've been learning, the simpler it is, the easier, because if it's not custom, you can find stuff out on the internet. So I do think that that's a really good point. Sorry, I know I just took us backwards in time. I just didn't say that.
Tim, do you have thoughts about, I'm not talking to myself either, do you have thoughts with regards to backporting these changes?
Yeah, I'm torn. I want to see this cleaned up last year. So yeah, I think we would need to be a little careful about how we do it, because there's gonna be a visceral reaction. And because there's almost no testing of what we publish today, it's harder to prove that you have a A/B, the new thing is as good or better than the prior thing. One option would be, over the 115 cycle, presuming that the workgroup K8s folks are moving forward on that front, that we focus on standing up a flow that populates that new infrastructure, and we demonstrate that it, in a clean way, is better than the old way. Because right now, doing a comparison with the old way is fraught.
It's just going to put the release team in a weird bind for the next
Yeah.
9 months, right?
Yeah.
So the question,
Well, my
question
hope
is like,
would be that sooner than that, if we show that the new non-Google workflow and hosting is good, that we could get to a point sooner that we just turn the old stuff off, which would imply having backported this, then demonstrate it, but then that be the proof point for people saying, okay, this is okay for us to backport to the other branches.
we just need to keep track of the changes. Um, Typically, the problem I think with this particular model, because we're trying to, if we do need to backport, is we need to keep track of every little thing we do and all the PRs and batch them in chunks to make it so it's easier to backport.
Yeah, I think if this is mostly going to be isolated to the build directory, and in terms of what the current build flow is for the what I call sort of the existing Google workflow for build publication, that doesn't use Kubernetes build at all. So there's not going to be existing patches on that in prior branches. So I don't have any concern that there'd be any conflict on a cherry pick there, or else that we couldn't just manually straight drop in wholesale replacement. So that level of patch munging I could do very quickly. I'm not worried about.
Okay. I'm more concerned about release management of the artifacts. Like we can do this in KK pretty easily. Like I think this would be on the order of weeks. Like we could get it done.
Yeah. And that's where I feel like it would be a whole lot easier to just say we're doing it in the new flow, have set up a preferred layout with something for testing repos as well in the new infra, because the existing stuff is on the backs of individuals. Like unless I change jobs to work for Google, I'm never actually going to see the scripting that they use to do the actual build publish step.
Yeah, exactly. That part, the publishing part, is the trickier bit to make sure that the release team is not in some weird purgatory for 115. I would hate for us to like have 115 artifacts generated one way and all the previous artifacts generated a different way, and then try to maintain that for all the CVEs that come out for the next 6 to 9 months.
Worst case, I see that as a forcing function to say, hey, look at this. We've got community support and it's easier on the current stuff. Let's finally make the old stuff that way if there was resistance. I think because it's unknown, or sorry, unowned effectively at this point, and on the backs of a few individuals at Google, I think there's going to be people who are receptive to making a change if we can demonstrate that what's there is okay.
The only place to go is up, man.
The bar is extremely low right now.
Would it be impossible for us to just ask Google for that script that does that?
I've been asking for about a year, and the closest I've gotten is to hearing it referred to as the rapture process, and I'm guessing even that word is somehow confidential and isn't supposed to exist outside their walls. So I've asked around in circles, and the only way I get information is when somebody's accidentally mentioned something or sent out a link to a file, like, oh, it's all documented here, and oh, wait, no, you can't actually view that because you're not a Google employee. So, and I've asked, like, could this be opened up? Could you scrub it, sanitize it? And it's always just, it's ended up in crickets.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, like, what is the feedback from the Googlers about repos per branch? Because currently the repositories are hosted by Google, so they have to decide about this.
It's been like, oh yeah, no problem. That's easy to do. Okay, who can do it? Because it's got to be a Googler, right? And then again, nothing. So like, I don't have the ability to declare what their staff is working on.
So I have a site.
Well,
sorry, Tim. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
How about we bypass the Google process completely? Is there a hosting service that can provide us with repositories that we need?
Yes,
Well, that's where
there are.
Kate's infra work. Like we've been promised this official, better open community run way of things, and it's coming soon.
Does anyone know the state of that work? I should sync with DIMS
I've
and
been
Tim Hawkins.
tracking it. Yeah, it's getting close. We actually talked about packaging and repos yesterday in the meeting, so it's seeming like it's close, but still most of the talk in the meetings is around things like making sure the DNS is working right. Like they're but there's also 20 different things that they're working on getting lined up to make equivalent hosting for all the things that are hosted today. So I've felt since the new year that it's within weeks or a month from starting to start shifting into being on, but it continues to feel that way. And because of Google's I/O Next or whatever their conference is, they said that things are going to stop for the next couple of weeks on their side of things. So it's maybe the 115 cycle.
Okay, I need to sync with them to figure out where they're at. If we need to, if there's, if we reach our Kobayashi Maru, we should plan for that end game, because I don't want to be reliant on people that don't exist, right? If we're going to make these changes, I want to make sure, much like Kirk, I'm going to cheat the process. I don't believe in the no-win scenario. So I want to make sure that we have a road forwards that we can actually progress on, because otherwise we'll be beholden to them forever. And if we need to create an auxiliary channel by which we release artifacts, I'll do it. That seems fine. And I can talk to the CNCF about it too.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what people think about that. Maybe this is what it takes to light a fire under the Kate's infra. Because I mean, it's been the other thing. Like Google made their $9 million announcement in August. It's been 9 months and we still don't have infra running, and it's moving very slowly.
That's a lot of zeros for not a lot of stuff. I mean, you could pay me. I could just sit around and talk.
I would take $9 million and give the same output that we have. I mean, that's a little harsh, but I mean, like we don't have something working today after all this time. I know people have been working on it, but at some point, like you say, we got to have the end game. We got to actually have it running.
Yeah, not only that, but we need the maintainership. I think that's the biggest problem we have with our current infrastructure. Is like Google hands it off. Who owns it now?
At least for this packaging flow, I'm confident that we as a community can own and run it.
We being the release team, or like release team and the separate SIGs?
Yeah, us as a community together, like that we can, if we have requirements, we want to make a change, that we can articulate, agree them, and affect that change from whether it's a package template or the thing that generates that, and then that generates the packages, publishes the packages, multiple streams, whatever. Like we would have the ability to do all of that without being dependent on a Googler to make some change somewhere in a system that we don't see or understand.
So the release team engineering project, I'm not sure how this is going currently, but I see a problem in the overall release process of Kubernetes and the maintenance of what a release is. The problem is that we have a temporary release team and the SIG release leadership, but then the release team is disbanded and we don't have any engineers persistently fixing release problems.
Yeah, that is definitely a problem. That's why the release engineering sub-project has come into existence. I intend to staff that from my side and hope to see other companies involved in the ecosystem doing so as well. But we also have the problem of what we have is not exactly maintainable. I can't throw staff at improving Google's internal scripting. So I feel like where I can make a difference is on this new path. And I thought that the workgroup case infra stuff was moving on a velocity where that would be arriving sort of now, but I'm kind of left waiting. And I think the rel engineering stuff too, like people see the mess that's there, want to do something better, don't want to work on the existing stuff, but are waiting for the new system to be available so they could work on that.
Yeah, I need to sync up. We're kind of talking in a circle. I need to sync up with the infra working group to figure out where they're at. I'll do that offline. This stuff that the option B I mentioned before, we can do that now. I can get pieces in place and copy stuff over and mock the, get rid of the stuff that's basilisms.
So moving forward, so if I was going to do something this weekend, if you make a good spec file, what you need from me, what I could be working on is a thing to substitute the variables, substitute the things, and
Yes.
do the builds.
I would say like the simplest thing on the planet I can think of is a .sh file or some type of script that has some default variables that take in env overrides. And that could basically be just like create spec, or it would allow folks to have their customization at the same time. It would be able to generate canonical packaging artifacts.
Based off of your spec template.
Yeah, a spec.in file.
Okay. I will work on that this weekend then.
All right. Do folks have any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns? Other than we needed to get this done and it's kind of a mess.
So Tim Pepper said the PR yesterday that modifies the RPM specs drastically in a way that we basically it separates, to my understanding, separates the specs for different releases.
See the chat in the Zoom just now. I pasted a link to it.
Yeah, so we still have the problem that the users facing breakages. So I wanted us to somehow decide. I don't know if this meeting is the forum to decide how to fix the problem immediately, like patch it, quote unquote, patch it in a way, and maybe think of long-term solutions later. Because otherwise, like the people are continuing to create issues, and we need a solution. So possibly, Tim St. Clair, you can review the PR from Tim Pepper and say if this is at least a fix for the RPMs.
So what exactly are you doing here in this PR?
Making it so there's not one spec file to rule the world, and that there's not a bunch of conditional logic within them, because none of it was needed.
Well, that was, yes.
But to my understanding, this does not fix the old packages, right?
The only way to fix the old packages is to build newer packages.
Basically, you and Steven said that this is not an option.
It is. It'll take somebody at Google 48 hours of manual work, and again, maybe that's a forcing function.
Huh. But it's highly unlikely that this is going to happen like anytime soon.
And I think the odds of them introducing another error across all of that is high.
Yes. I don't think there's any verification. That's my biggest concern.
And
yeah, so like they make a change, no one verifies anything across all of the versions, because the problem here with the change is that it would affect everything, and there would be a patch released for all versions versus forcing people to go update. I would prefer just the statement of record that says, oops, we made a mistake. We're trying to fix it actively. In the interim, please upgrade to the latest patch version for your release. That seems like a reasonable approach, but this way when we close issues, we can say, hey, go look at this statement.
yeah, I guess we can do that. Did somebody send the message already?
No.
So I sent a message yesterday to SIG release and SIG cluster lifecycle soliciting opinions on the options here, because I don't think it's right for me to declare, and because I think my preferred path, I think, differs probably from what Tim St. Clair would do this position, or Lubomir as well. So like I don't think it's right for me to just say like this is what I'm doing to fix the problem as a chair of SIG release.
Well, if we had an errata like that we could canonically point people to, we'd just be like, oops, we made a mistake. It's going to be fixed in upcoming releases. So if you have an older version, the known workaround is to do X, Y, Z. That's a typical standard practice for release engineering, right? Like we did it all the time in the past.
I guess implicit within that, though, is that we do not support older releases.
Yeah.
If we did, the answer would be give us a little bit. We're going to push out updated packaging of the older releases, and you'll be able to upgrade to a newer package version of your older release, and you'll be fixed.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
And that's the big choice, to make that declaration. I want that declaration, but I don't know that it's my call to make that summarily for the project. And especially because users have the perception today that this has worked, that this is changing something, that we're regressing against their expectations or belief in support.
This is also related to the question, like in the future specs that we want to have, should we hard bind to a specific version of CNI, for instance?
Yes, because it should be branched. So like the work that we're doing right now will be branched. The version will be branched per Kubernetes release artifact.
Given what we've discovered for how the package managers work, we can't hard bind unless we also remove old packages when we publish new packages.
No, you'll be fine. If you're hard bound for a specific version of a spec and you release that package, well, it'll be in the RPM spec itself to force the specific version to install.
That's the bug today, that we're hard bound against old CNI. It sees the new CNI package and says, oh, I don't know what to do. Even though it's hard bound, everything should resolve. All I can say is that both for the debs and the RPMs, the dependency resolver on the client side, it installed.
No. You updated the version that for like 113.4, right?
No.
Well, how did the is that a release problem with the repository?
So Andy, I think explained it, and also Jason. I think the reason for this, so we are basically saying equals 060, but the depths are not respecting this at all. And basically what Andy and Jason said is that probably because of the major of the CNI package is 0, there's some logic inside the package management stuff that is not respecting the equal sign, and it's trying to get the 075 instead.
Equals does not work. This
Yes.
is the problem. Our old packages say they want old dependencies. Those are all present in the repository, but newer packages also happen to be present. On the surface, that shouldn't be an issue. The old packages should pull in their old package dependencies. They're all present there, self-consistent, cool. But somehow it notices that in the repository, there's a newer version of the dependency. Happens to have a leading 0 on the version number. I haven't run into this before, and looking all across other distros, I see that case exists, and I'm sure it has in lots of cases forever, but for some reason that breaks things. The only difference I see is when you act like a distribution, instead of just a project populating a directory with all of your releases, is a distribution, your repository contains the latest set, one of each package.
One of the things that we should strive to do too is when I was looking at the repository, it was not curated. Like we didn't remove things that were out of date. We had CNI, which was super old. We had a whole bunch of stuff that was super old inside the repository. And I think we should probably remove that stuff. If you even look at like standard Docker repositories, they do not have things in there that are no longer supported by their support matrix. So we should remove those things.
Yep. And we've got people saying that breaks their usage model with kubeadm.
So I have a question. Like, how are other projects solving this problem with the equal sign and like a new dependency being?
I'm not sold on that supposition. I think there's something with a repository, with how the depth chain is working. Because like
That's the difference. That I don't know that I've not seen I'm trying to think of an example of a project that puts its stuff in a repository like this and has all of the stuff there. Like when you put up a repository, you're acting like a distribution. What that repository should contain is the current set of what's preferred by the distribution. That curation action needs to happen. I think the package manager, I mean, based on the behavior here, the package manager supposes that that is the case.
yeah, but like you can do hard requires against old versions that are .0. It's been, I mean, if you look at a bunch of spec files, they do.
I don't think that's. Do you know? Can you point to a Yum repo, for example, that's got like pick something Vim, today's Vim and last year's Vim sitting in the same thing, and you can say DNF install old Vim.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can downgrade and get the older version. So you can do Yum downgrades or DNF downgrade, and you can get the previous version. It'll rectify.
Oh, but yeah, so that presumes there that the version level is that the distro is versioning. So what we would, to do something similar to that in this case, we would, and there's still only one. There would be one Vim for Fedora 29, one for Fedora 28. We would need repos that are Kubernetes 114, Kubernetes 113, and we'd have one instance of kubelet, kubeadm, kubectl in each of those repositories.
I think that is a sane road to go down. But
sorry.
We're totally into release territory right now. We're no longer in packaging.
Yeah, I was going to say this seems interesting, but I feel like this is what distribution should be doing, not us.
Yeah. So I think the answer of B is what we should be aiming for, and we can bike shed on the release semantics for the release repo. But I think we should start. That should be owned by the K8s infra group and the release team to manage that stuff and to come up with concrete use cases. I think the packaging stuff we can get that in order pretty soon. But we should definitely follow up with like if we can backport these changes or not, and if the release team can actually submit packages from the backports.
So I will release an update to the KEP as well.
I think I don't think this is. We can. Let's just start to work on the action items and then update the KEP as appropriate because it's still provisional, and things change. So let's get a POC in place, modify the existing versions. We can start with RPMs because they're not actually used in CI. So I can get all the pieces in place and then switch the devs second.
Okay, sounds good. This weekend I will get the SH script going then.
So should we send a message to KDEF? That was my question.
I think we should, but that's my opinion.
I think we should too, but if we just say we're fixing the problem, we don't have an outlook on when or how at this point still to communicate.
That's fine. I think at least notifying the community and being honest to them, I think is worthwhile so that we can point them at a location that says, hey, we recognize there's a problem. Please stop filing 10,000 issues, or we can close and say we're working on it.
Okay, I can go ahead and send that right now.
Yeah, because I got DM'd. I don't know about you, Lumir, but I got DM'd, I think, 4 times yesterday.
I didn't get DM'd because I probably don't have the list of chairs, but I did respond to all of tickets. Yep. Basically, we should send a message. I think we should include that the packages are currently a best effort, unmaintained. Everybody should upgrade to the latest patch version of a branch. and yeah, we might solve the problem long term.
Okay. Any other last questions, comments, complaints, concerns? We went full cycle on this one. Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye bye.